I mentioned earlier that your podcast and the messy marketplace is one of those things that every entrepreneur need to listen to. And I think that also Built to Sell, like it's a great book for people and entrepreneurs to learn and understand how to build their organization. Built to Sell and also the E-Myth, obviously. So those two books are must. I'm wondering if you have some recommendations on books, on workshops, on master classes, whatever it is for the business owners who wanna become better themselves, who wanna improve their skill sets as managers, because we might be the best technicians in the world, but when it comes to business owners, a lot of the times we're not that good, and it takes a lot of humility to admit it. But we need to grow, and I feel as a coach myself, and as someone who's joining numerous coaching programs, that learning from others who went through the path that you're on right now and been through what you're going through right now is the best way to do it. So I'm wondering if you know from companies that you've invested in, if they're members of specific clubs, or if they're workshops, or
sure.
like any material that will help the
just any recommendations
or listening to this. Yeah,
sure. Okay, so I'll run through a list because I've got plenty of these. So first would be, we do regularly publish on our site. And we have a newsletter that is called The Permanent Playbook, and it's specifically intended for operators of businesses. And we send an email every 2 to 3 weeks, but they're thematically based. So it's either on hiring or some sort of operational philosophy, and within it is something original that we've created for the benefit of the operator, but then also other resources that have inspired us. So whether those be, HBS case studies or a YouTube video or whatever it may be. So I would encourage people to subscribe to the Permanent Playbook newsletter, which is on permanentequity.com. I would say that for owners specifically, there are a couple of books and one of which I'm just now finishing, but I think will be on my list long term as well. So the one that I normally recommend people look into is called Glass House. And it's written by a journalist, and it is absolutely one-sided in terms of the author's perspective on what happened. And I don't agree with all the conclusions that he drew within the book, but it is the story about a factory town in Lancaster, Ohio, and a business that was owned by an individual who just wanted to retire and move to Florida. Nothing malicious, nothing consequential. He was of the appropriate age. But he picked a suitor to sell to that then successively sold the business every 3 years over a period of, I believe, 15 years. And this journalist went back because he was from the area and just walked through his experience from having been a child in the area to now being, now still having friends and family in the area, but no longer living there, and coming back as a journalist and just being absolutely offended by the state of affairs, right? Where leadership all lives out of town. The business now employs a fraction of the employee base it used to. The town in general has become downtrodden. And again, he's drawing some conclusions that I think are somewhat emotionally charged, but it's a warning bell for any owner about how to think about how to choose a suitor, in my opinion. So it's a book that I think is important in that regard. And then the next one, which just came out, but is really quite good, is Power Failure. So it's on GE GE. And so it's Jack Welch versus Jeff Immelt, and it's written from a third party point of view. And he is really talking through, Jack's perspective on what he thought he left in the business to his successor, and then how that was stewarded forward, and really drawing criticisms on both sides about what was the state of affairs and what should you expect of the future generations in terms of stewardship. And I think it would lead to some really interesting conversations for an owner on, how do I think about what post-close life looks like, particularly in the sense of we always try to avoid people having seller's remorse, right? And being mad if the business does better when they are no longer involved. I think that's a really big challenge culturally, and it's a really big challenge for obviously the individuals involved. And so in that way, that's something that we proactively like to have conversations about with anybody who's involved in a deal with us. So that book for me has generated a lot of thoughts around, what was each gentleman's intent and perspective and posture as that transition took place, and then obviously what's happened to GE over the period since, and trying to think through how could things have turned out better. So those are two books I would recommend for owners. In terms of organizations and membership opportunities, I think there are increasingly a wide variety of things that people can join and belong to, that give them different versions of think tanks, if you will, and peer groups. So obviously there's EO, Entrepreneurs Organization. There's the EOS system has created quite a network around theirs. There's Tugboat for people who believe in maintaining continuity and family involvement for as long as possible. And so those are without industry affiliation, those are some of the groups that come top of mind. If you want to get to know sort of advisors and more traditional investors and financiers of varying types, Association of Corporate Growth is another one. So they have, local chapters in most major cities. And that's another place that you can go and spend time. And they have operator tracks as well. So it can be for owners, but also for operators. So those are a variety of the ones that come top to mind. But I would say that, the other thing that we're trying to do to advance this is bring down the professionalism layer a little bit and allow people to get to know each other as people. And we started experimenting with this first among investors only. So you can imagine, what people think of as an investor conference is a lot of people in suits. And our experience is that most investment conferences are a lot of people in suits, and and it's not very fun. And it's pretty stuffy. So we started an event called Capital Camp in 2019 that's held annually, where we bring people together in an incredibly informal setting, in shorts and flip-flops kind of attire, to have shared experience, eat a lot of really good food, and just fellowship, right? Get to know each other. So we are doing that for the first time for a non-investor community, and instead for the broader community of smaller companies, small to mid-sized companies is the way we're phrasing it. And we're calling that Main Street Summit. And so Main Street Summit will be an in-person event held this November with the intention of it being an annual event to go on in the future. And it has kind of a South by Southwest kind of feel to it. So there will be a large variety of events going on all over town. The nice part is our town is used to hosting festivals. So we have a variety of venues that convert themselves nicely for use for a variety of purposes. And we're going to do 2.5 days of people just coming together around small businesses. And so all different types of operations, all different types of challenges that you may be encountering, and really having workshops and discussions and think groups around those things, and in a variety of different industries as well. So I would encourage people to look into that. I think there's already about 1,000 people on the waiting list for it. So it should be a pretty pretty sizable event, and tickets are going to go on sale in June. But those are all things that I think of when I think of like, how do you make recommendations? It's like, you want real information, right? You want real encounters, and people who are not trying to sell you things, but are instead saying, you know what, I'm dealing with similar stuff, and let's talk through what's worked for you and what's worked for me. And I think that that's most often or best done oftentimes in person. And so I would encourage people to seek out the events both within their industry and things like Main Street Summit, to be able to come together in, just a day or two, to really talk through those things and find some relationships that they can continue to foster over the long term.
Emily, I love what you guys are doing. You guys are really transforming in a way like private equity, and in every sense, like you can think of, from the accessibility, from the knowledge, from the like you said, like down to earth events, and not having caviar and just 3-piece suits. And I absolutely love it, and I think that that you guys are doing amazing job.